Welcome back, ready for another deep dive.
Let's do it.
Awesome. This time we're looking at resin printing again, specifically the Formlabs Form 4.
Oh, Formlabs, they always make a splash.
Right, and we're basing this on a pretty in-depth review from 3D printing industry. They really put it through the ringer.
Sound like we've got a lot to unpack. What's the big story with this one?
Well, they're really pushing the speed aspect, calling it a game changer, that kind of thing.
The game changer, we hear that a lot.
Yeah, but I gotta say, I am curious.
What's got you hooked?
They're claiming print speeds up to 100 millimeters per hour, which is pretty wild for resin.
That is fast. I'm assuming they've got some new tech behind that.
Exactly. It's called the Low Force Display Engine, or LFD.
LFD, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that one before.
It's like a hybrid of LCD and SLA tech, supposed to make the printing faster and smoother.
Interesting. I'm always a little wary when someone says they can do both.
Yeah, me too. But I'm willing to hear them out.
Fair enough. How's this LFD supposed to work?
So it uses less force to cure the resin. That's supposed to be the key to getting those fine details and smooth layers.
Less force for better quality. I'm not sure I follow the logic there.
Think of it like spreading something thick like honey with a knife. You gotta press down hard and it can get messy.
I see where you're going with this.
But with a spatula, you just glide it across. Nice and easy. Smooth finish. That's what the LFD is going for.
Okay, that's a pretty good analogy. I'm starting to get it. But analogies aside, what's the price tag on this thing?
It's sitting at $4,499.
So, not cheap.
Not exactly an impulse buy, but it's not crazy expensive either, especially compared to some industrial printers.
Yeah, that's true. Who are they marketing this toward then? Hobbyists? Professionals?
It seems like they're aiming for that sweet spot. Professionals and serious hobbyists who want top-notch quality without breaking the bank.
Makes sense. And how about the resin tank? Those are always a consumable with resin printing.
That's actually one of the highlights. The review says this tank can last for over 75,000 layers.
Wow, that's a lot. Most people probably wouldn't even need to replace it for a year or two.
Exactly. So you're not constantly shelling out for new tanks. But let's move on to user-friendliness. How easy is this thing to use?
Well, the reviewers said it was surprisingly straightforward. Easy setup, intuitive touchscreen, even for beginners.
That's good to hear. Some of those resin printers can be a real pain to get going. What about post-processing?
They've got you covered there, too.
Yeah.
They have these separate units, the Form Wash and Form Cure. They streamline cleaning and curing.
Oh, that's smart. They're building a whole ecosystem around it.
Exactly. Now, we can't forget about the software. They use their own slicing software called PreForm.
Right, PreForm. Is that as user-friendly as the printer itself?
From what the review says, yes. Super intuitive, and they have this one-click print feature that does exactly what it sounds like.
Wow, that's pretty handy. Sounds perfect for beginners. What about the more experienced users, though?
Well, some reviewers did mention that PreForm might be lacking in advanced features. You might have to sacrifice some control for that ease of use.
Yeah, that's always the trade-off. But for most users, I think the simplicity would be a welcome change.
Probably. So we've talked tech, price, user experience, software. What's next?
The big question, right? How does it actually print? Did they run any real-world tests?
Oh, yeah, they did. Lots of them. Speed, accuracy, overhangs, you name it. They even printed some pretty interesting objects to see how it would handle real-world applications.
Like what? Give me the good stuff.
Okay, so they printed a whole bunch of motorcycle fuel pump clips, a Viking figurine, even some sunglasses.
Sunglasses. Now I'm intrigued. Were they functional?
Not quite. They ran into some issues with the threads and supports. It seems like superfine details can still be a bit tricky.
Ah, so it's not perfect. But those other tests, the clips, the figurine, they were successful.
Yeah, those turned out really well. We can dive into those in more detail if you want.
Definitely. That's where the rubber meets the road, right? Seeing how it performs in practice.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into those real-world tests. You mentioned motorcycle fuel pump clips, right?
Yeah, they printed a whole batch of them, like 24 identical clips.
Okay. And each clip had?
Intricate details, little bits of text on the surface, the whole 9 yards.
How did they turn out?
Amazingly well, actually. The reviewers were really impressed with the level of detail.
Like, how good are we talking?
They said the text was super crisp, almost as good as injection molding.
Wow, so this LFD thing really does deliver.
Seems like it. They even suggested that the clips could be used as functional replacements for the originals.
Okay, so we're not just talking about prototypes anymore. This could actually be used for real-world parts.
Exactly. It opens up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
Custom manufacturing, small batch production, all that good stuff.
That's pretty exciting. Okay, so The clips were a success. What about that Viking figurine? You mentioned that one earlier.
Ugh, yes, the Viking. It was a real test of the Form 4's ability to handle fine details and smooth curves.
So did it pass the test?
The actual print quality was fantastic. Super smooth finish, barely any visible layer lines, no noticeable flaws.
Sounds perfect. What's the catch?
The supports. Even though they used the smallest support touch points, there were still some marks left on the figurine after they removed them.
Ah, so it's not a flawless victory. Supports, always a pain.
It's true. Even with all this advanced technology, we're still dealing with the same old post-processing headaches.
I guess that's part of the fun, right? Figuring out the little tricks.
Well, hopefully they can improve the support generation in the future. But yeah, for now, it's something to keep in mind.
All right, so the Viking was a mixed bag. What about the sunglasses? Did they manage to print a wearable pair?
Not exactly. They tried printing the frames with these really fine threads for the hinges and connectors.
And I'm guessing those threads didn't quite work out.
You got it. The threads were too fine, and there was some shrinkage during printing, so they ended up binding and breaking.
Ah, too bad. Back to the drawing board on that one.
They tried printing the frames with thicker threads, and that did solve the binding problem.
Oh, good. So they were able to get a working hinge.
Kind of. But then they ran into another issue, with the supports again. The frames are so delicate that even small supports left marks on the surface.
So it's a trade-off. Thicker threads solve one problem but create another.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. And this test also highlighted the importance of choosing the right resin. They initially used Formlabs Clear V5, and it turned out to be a bit too brittle for the thin frames.
So material selection plays a big role too.
Definitely. You got to have the right ingredients, so to speak. The printer's only one part of the equation.
Sure enough. Okay, so the sunglasses weren't a complete success. What about the other tests? I think you mentioned a breathing mouthpiece.
Yeah, they printed that one in clear resin. It came out beautifully.
No cloudiness. No weird yellowing.
Nope, it was crystal clear. And the surface was so smooth, they didn't even have to polish it.
Wow, impressive. Clear resin can be tricky, so that's a good sign. Okay, so clear resin, check. What about flexible resins?
They actually printed a soft robotic gripper using Formlabs Elastic 50A resin.
So they were basically printing a rubber gripper. That's pretty cool.
It is, and the print quality was great, lots of intricate channels and details, and it actually functioned as intended.
But of course, there's a but.
There's always a but, right? Well, they did have some challenges with post-processing again.
What happened this time?
The surface of the gripper stayed kind of sticky even after curing. And the material itself was pretty fragile, so they had to be really careful removing it from the build platform.
Okay, so flexible resins are still a work in progress.
Yeah, there were some kinks to work out. But overall, it seems like the Form 4 can handle a pretty wide range of materials and applications.
It does seem pretty versatile, so we've seen a lot of mixed results here.
I'd say so. It excels in some areas, like precision and smooth surfaces, but struggles with others, like fine details and flexible materials.
And these are just the results from one review. It's always good to get multiple perspectives.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, before we move on, I'm curious to hear your overall impressions of the Form 4. Is it living up to the hype?
I think it's a significant step forward for resin printing. The combination of speed, accuracy, and ease of use is pretty impressive.
So it's a solid machine, but not without its quirks.
Exactly. No 3D printer is perfect, right?
Right. But before we get too lost in the technical details, let's bring it back to the listener for a minute. What does all this mean for someone who's actually considering buying this printer?
Yeah, good point. Let's talk practical applications.
So we've seen the Form 4 print those motorcycle parts with no problem, but then struggle with those sunglasses. What's the takeaway there?
I think it really shows how important it is to pick the right tool for the job, you know?
Right. So what are the big things our listeners should think about if they're considering the Form 4?
Well, first off, what are you going to be using it for mostly? Prototypes, detailed models, functional parts.
And we saw that material choice can make a big difference too.
Yeah, definitely. If you're working with those flexible resins or you need superfine threads, you might run into some issues.
Okay, good to know. And then, of course, there's the price. Over $4,000 isn't exactly pocket change.
True, but you got to weigh that against what you're getting. If you need that speed and accuracy and you value ease of use, it might be worth it.
Especially with that long-lasting resin tank. That'll save you some money down the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this whole conversation has got me thinking, where does resin printing go from here? What about a Form 5?
Ooh, good question. Faster speeds, even finer details, maybe.
Right? Or what about some kind of built-in sensor that adjusts the settings based on the resin you're using?
Oh, and maybe a self-cleaning resin tank. One can dream, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, the future's looking pretty exciting for resin printing.
It really is. Okay, so to wrap this up, what's the bottom line on the Form 4? Should our listeners be running out to buy one?
Well, I think it's a strong contender, that's for sure. The speed, the accuracy, the ease of use, it's all pretty impressive. But it's not perfect.
Right. Like any tool, it has its strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. So I'd say if you're a professional or a serious hobbyist and you need really high-quality prints, it's definitely worth checking out.
And remember, 3D printing is always evolving. Who knows what we'll be talking about this time next year?
That's the best part. There's always something new on the horizon.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the Formlabs Form 4. Until next time, happy printing, everyone!